Speaking of the financial crisis and the efforts to fix Wall Street, many short-term ideas and stimulus plans are being batted around by Congress. But at this year's AFBF convention, the leaders of the American Farm Bureau decided to think long-term. This week in Louisiana Agriculture's Ryan Naquin shows us one way the AFBF is helping its members financially wake up.
If financial troubles come in waves, this trio of financial analysts say the big one is upon us.
We are riding today on the first wave of the entitlement tsunami that's coming our way.
During the Fiscal Wake Up Tour seminar, experts warned that the national debt would likely continue to grow with Washington's current policy.
We're trying to spread an alarm, not preach the gospel of fiscal gloom and doom. But here's the important point. We all agree that the current fiscal policy is unsustainable. It's a matter of arithmetic, not ideology.
We're making promises today without regard to what the needs of the day are. So we've made these promises long before, for instance, we had the current financial crisis. So to pay for the current financial crisis, we've already committed these other revenues.
Right now, the national debt is at a record high at $10 trillion. Bigsby says entitlement programs such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid take up about 42% of the federal budget, and that these programs are pushing that national debt even higher. The reason for this growing deficit is because last year was the first year that baby boomers became eligible to collect Social Security. The experts say over the next 25 years, people 65 and older will grow from 13% of the U.S. population to 20%, and that puts a lot of pressure on these three important programs.
They are driving the federal budget from this 20% of the economy to almost 40% in less than 2 generations, and that's a real problem.
Another huge problem Americans face is the amount of interest being accrued by the national debt. Last year, Washington spent about 10% of the national budget to pay off interest.
It's more than we spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, around $250 billion or so. It's more than we spent in the federal government's share of the Medicaid program. So it's a lot of money that we spend on interest costs, and of course the more debt we run, the bigger that will grow.
Sterl and Bigsby say future generations will bear the brunt of the current policy.
These debts are largely being left to your, depending on how old you are, being left to your children and your grandchildren.
This really isn't a numbers issue. It really is a moral issue. The question is, what sort of a country are we leaving to future generations? And right now, the answer is not so good.
The panel not only explained the situation, but gave solutions on what needs to be done. Fraser suggests entitlements should be treated the same as any other basic government function, while others say it's a choice that needs to be made by the American people.
It would mean that entitlements would have to compete as priorities for the nation with education, poverty spending, transportation, farm programs, and so forth.
Whether we're going to have to do something about controlling the cost, the rising cost of those programs, or raising revenues to pay for it, that's a decision that the American people need to make through the political process, but we can't ignore it, because if we ignore it, we just run enormous budget deficits and eventually the economy crashes.
A crash that will hopefully be heard in Washington before it's too late. From San Antonio, I'm Ryan Naquin for This Week in Louisiana Agriculture.
The AFBF thought the Fiscal Wake Up Tour was such an important conference for farmers that it was the only seminar scheduled twice during the entire convention.